Hello again. Welcome to another digital Q&A here with RiverRun. I'm once again Christopher Holmes, senior programmer for RiverRun. Glad to be joined by Edson Jean, who's the director of Ludi, which is the film you all hopefully just watched. Otherwise, it'd be a little strange that you're here. But thank you all for tuning in to this. And thank you, Edson, for being here. You said you're joining us from your hometown of Miami, Florida.
Yes, indeed, in Miami. Thanks so much for having me, and thanks for everybody for watching it.
Yeah, our pleasure. Our relationship goes back to we actually met this same way back in the fall through IFP, Independent Filmmaker Project Labs, that you all were a part of with this. How did that experience go? How did that inform the final cut that the people just watched?
IFP was such a wonderful and collaborative process. I think I recently heard about it before submitting to it, so I wasn't extremely familiar with IFP in regards to how the event and the programming was had years prior, but sort of like partaking in it, that was the conversation, I think, for most events throughout the years, just like, oh, how do we hold up virtually as opposed to the way we used to do things? But so ourselves, me, myself, my producer, Fabiola Rodriguez, and editor, Jonathan Quartas, participated in an IFP, and it was a great experience. It was all virtual. We met our cohorts virtually, but it was pretty, those different phases, first coming in with the work in progress and getting feedback from editors and different mentors in the industry. And that went all the way into post-production and then ultimately collaborating in different ways. That did, in my opinion, support and help how we ultimately came to a final cut. So it was hands-on, but they also left us room to either take or leave their notes. It wasn't like, too many cooks in the kitchen, so to speak.
Yeah. And you just recently premiered the film. It played Miami International Film Festival was the world premiere, and then South by Southwest, correct?
Yeah, then now it's an awesome opportunity because I think usually South by Southwest and Miami Film Festival sort of like stack on top of each other. So because of the pandemic and a lot of these different festivals shifting their dates slightly up, slightly down, usually South by doesn't generally screen things that might have premiered in Miami, but it worked out to our benefit. So we're super appreciative and humbled from Miami Film Festival and South by, and even RiverRun. It's humbling to bring the film to new audiences, and as important as it is for me to reflect unspoken, not unspoken, but underrepresented voices to those who are underrepresented. I think it's also really important to create conversation with communities outside of those pockets.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's what RiverRun exists for as well. So we're happy to be able to give you a mouthpiece here in Winston-Salem. Um, but I was curious, you said Miami was actually you had the opportunity to screen indoors in theaters there. What and South by was that virtual or
Yeah.
in person?
So Miami was sort of like a hybrid experience, but hybrid being partly indoors and then partly virtual if you didn't want to participate indoors. But the advantage of sort of being in Florida is that things are moving a little in advance than other parts of the country as far as like gatherings are concerned. So that was an awesome experience because our premiere was able to be in a theater, screen the film in a theater, in a large theater. And my mom was there, so she saw it for the first time in a theatrical
Oh wow.
experience. Yeah, so
You had
that
not seen any cut at any point?
nope, nope, I hadn't given her anything. So that was a great experience. And South by was completely online. And their platform was actually very, very interactive, and I was really impressed with. South by is a festival that's so much about like being there, that I always wondered like, what is South by going to be in a virtual experience? But I thought they did a really good job of creating platforms for filmmakers and audiences to engage with each other, parties outside of the actual South by platform through like Clubhouse and different things like that. So it was very two different experiences, but both extremely um, beneficial, and it's like all of it is new.
Yeah.
I thought it worked out really well. We didn't really feel any
Did
like.
you learn anything new or surprising from the actual in-person audiences watching it with a live audience for the first time, probably?
Oh yeah, 100%. Even just like new in regards to seeing how people respond to different parts of the film,
Yeah.
and then from another standpoint, from having that organic people come up to you and have a conversation, that's widely have been missed in the past year and a half. So that was a tremendous opportunity to sort of get that immediate feedback after sort of people sharing their experiences, and a lot of people who are not of the Haitian American demographic coming up and feeling identified, because there are larger themes, right? It's an immigrant story. It talks about it covers women in the workplace. So you know, focus on specificity, but within specificity, there's universality. So that was a real treat to have those conversations in the moment with different people and connect with them.
Yeah. And talking about the specificity and the personal aspects of it, you mentioned your mom saw it for the first time, and I know this was to some degree based on your mom's own real life experiences. I mean, how biographical are we talking? Is this and are you? Does this story reflect partially your experience with her growing up, or how much
So
liberty did you take?
so I took liberty, and what it is, it's sort of an amalgamation of the many stories that she's told me, not all of them, but very much autobiographical in regards to like her earlier years when she emigrated from Haiti and to Miami in the US. And so these were things that she would just tell me these stories, and I was always sort of like be enthralled with them. And if something new was coming up, so these were pieces from sort of like a period in time in her earlier years, as she was working as a lot of odd jobs, but also as a private caretaker. Um, as she would like, she'd have friends here in Miami that had been here for a couple of years, so more established, and they would sort of give her a job, sort of like the night shift, which you don't necessarily need a nursing license for, but as long as you know the protocol, a practitioner could hire you for a shift. So she would find herself in those situations a lot. But yeah, that it was a great opportunity, and in that regard too, it was kind of like I'm waiting to see sort of how she responded to it. Did she feel represented? If she's like, "Oh no, Edson, you got it all wrong," because I didn't necessarily allow her in the process
Hmm.
in regards to like looking at a cut. Um, I really saw it as an opportunity to sort of like trust myself in the experience that I know that she went through and offer it as a gift to start a dialogue and a conversation. Um, so when she was like moved and floored, I was like, all right, good. We did something right here. But yeah.
Do you remember her exact first words that she said to you after the film was over?
Well, yeah, she was crying. So, and she came to me and she was like, spoke specifically about the actress Shane Montpellier in regards. She was like, I kid you not, because I say this in like when I'm talking about the film and my mission as a creative in wanting people to be seen. But she said, "Oh, I saw myself through Shane and how she played." And I was like, "That's exactly what we want to do." And then so she started riffing off other stories that she probably hadn't told me yet. And she was like, "Oh yeah, and this moment reminded me of this thing," and like, and I was like, "That's the reward. That's the reward to feel like." To create a platform where not only sort of seeing ourselves and just approaching it in this celebratory way, but also these stories elicit more stories, more conversation for others. And I saw that even directly with my mom, even if it's like she saw herself in there, there was like so many other stories compiled, hers, friends of hers, that she was able to just feel the freedom and the agency to sort of share about.
Yeah. And was that specific scenario like going to the wrong apartment? Was that something that came from your mom's stories, or was that just something that was born out of your own creativity?
Yeah, so that out of the wrong apartment was born out of my creativity. So there were interested instances inspired by that. There was one instant where she had because usually what she would have to do, she would have to take multiple buses to get to the because most of her first client was a Jewish woman actually, and that's when she had her first quote unquote American breakfast. Um, but when she would go, they were in the South Beach area, and when my mom lived here, she lived more on the mainland, as we would call it, away from the beach and sort of like the North Miami area. And she was living in a room of a friend at that time, and she would take like 4 buses to get to work. So she had to wake up at like 4 a.m. or something like that for a like 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock time to be at work.
Jeez.
And so there was one instant where it's like she, and this is also in response to sort of like the Ludi character, is like my mom was also very stubborn and reluctant to ask for help when she probably needed it or like wasn't sure about something. So because she didn't want to be a burden on people, so she assumed she would know how to get there, and she took the wrong buses and ended up like really west in Miami and was like completely lost. So like when she would tell me that story, it was just sort of like that sort of anticipating to be somewhere, being in the wrong place, not getting there is sort of where I pulled the seed from to kind of add that apartment switch in the narrative.
And talk about casting for trying to find someone to play essentially a version of your mother. Were you looking specifically for a particular someone that was very reminiscent of her, or was this someone that you had written the part specifically for that you already knew, or how did she come into the story?
Yeah. So Shane, I knew before and from an earlier digital series project I did, and didn't work with her extensively on that. Oh, we did. We had I think she was like in 3 episodes or whatnot. But when I met her, that was the first time I met her, I was like, I knew that she was the person I wanted to write it for. Just so many similarities. She understood the Haitian sensibility, spoke the language. Well, I didn't know this at the time, but her mother and her aunt were both also nurses and private caretakers. So when I wrote the film with co-writer Joshua Jean-Baptiste, we definitely wrote it with Shane in mind. Didn't say anything until like maybe I had a draft to share, and I was like, "Yo, so we want to read this and see if it's something you might be into." And she was excited to. So, fortunately for me, I didn't have to sort of scour the earth to look for the lead, and that really was a huge help in bringing the other supporting characters around her. But knowing that you had someone to really carry the film was just really a huge benefit.
Yeah, and I'm trying to remember now. It's been a minute since I saw it, but I know you come from a performing background yourself. I don't remember you. Are you in the film? How did
Yeah,
you not?
yes, but no. I mean, I still in all the projects up to this, I'm acting in them and directing. But this one, it wasn't about necessarily a male character. So there was a world where I would have played the Evans character, but I was excited to look for other options and like let someone else sit into that role. But I show up in like a commercial for like a split second
Okay.
in the
I
background.
didn't think that you were, I didn't remember seeing you, but I was trying to think that must have been, that shows a lot of restraint as an actor to not write
Yes, it's like,
yourself
oh, I
in.
want to be in there.
I commend you for that. Um, I'm also, something I like to ask people a lot is if I'm just curious if there's a particular scene or sequence in the film that you're most proud of as a director or a writer or whatever. But if there is, and why?
Um, I would say the interlude segments, um, where where we're hearing her cassette tapes that she had sent to her cousins, and they're playing, and we're seeing sort of like these vignettes um, of the little Haiti neighborhood in Miami, and it's how it's reminiscent and it's dreamy. And that was something that when I choose that as something I'm proud of because I learned from those. And I love when you have an idea as an artist, but if you leave yourself open and allow yourself to be a vessel for something greater, bigger things than maybe what you thought of could have happened. And that's what those sections sort of came up to be, because initially they weren't written in the script. And it was, I think, after a couple cuts in, um, I don't know, something came together and I had this other footage we were using, and I wanted, there was a longing for the nostalgia from back home to sort of persist throughout the movie. And those sort of found themselves in those areas. So like, I love that as a sign of like not thinking you have to figure it all out, but trusting the process and allowing yourself to discover new things in the path as an artist. So those are just an example and a reminder to
Yeah.
let go, you know?
Yeah. Were there, do you remember, were there specific like albums or other films you were looking or books you were reading as you were making the film to kind of inform your headspace or kind of shape it a little bit?
Yeah, I think there's maybe not books. There were more like playlists I would listen to, because a lot of this was sort of like an experience that I had captured in my mind growing up, because these are just a series of like stories, right? From my mother and seeing pieces of that from her coming back home, and sharing or not sharing certain things. So a lot of this world like just existed in sort of like this ethereal place. So I didn't necessarily reference already published or established pieces of work to inspire that. It was sort of like already existing in my mind in that way. Um, but sometimes when I wanted to relax or rest in this an idea of the world, or maybe the aesthetics and textures of the world, sound is something that allows me to get into that space. So it's not so literal as maybe a book or like images. Um, and through music, specific old Haitian music, which is called racine music, which stands for roots, which is a different sound than the more popular compa music in Haiti. So I would listen to some of those artists. And then I found myself also listening to old radio shows that they used to have in the 70s in Haiti, where it was huge, because most people didn't have a TV. So just listening to the radio was a great deal, a huge deal. 70s and more 80s, late 70s. Um, and so some of those old radio shows are now you could access them on Spotify.
Okay,
And
I was
things
wondering.
like, yeah, that I didn't grow up with. And so I just in doing research, I had found them, and like people who also my parents didn't share with me. And then when I came to them, was like, oh, do you know this person? They're like, what? Where'd you find this? You know, because so much of the culture is not being passed down from two generations in large part. And I think a lot of that has to do with cultural assimilation and coming to a new country. And as the caretaker, you want to put yourself in business to learn the language so you can get yourself better job opportunities. So then you're not necessarily passing on the culture that you left to your children. So listening to those would sort of take me back into this place of harkening back. And
Yeah.
yeah.
So what's your do you get to spend any, have you been to Haiti much? Do you have a, what's your relationship with that nation like? And what are your plans to maybe find a way to screen the film over there?
Yeah, my relationships with Haiti are bittersweet. I do go there as often as I can. Through the pandemic, I haven't. And I wasn't even thinking about this, but it was after the film finished that I realized that as this first generation Haitian American um, in my family, I realized that I still am reflecting sort of like the journey of Ludi, because I have a relationship with my cousins and my family over there. And one of my cousins in particular, our relationship is solely through sort of like WhatsApp and calls and video messaging. Video messaging, not so much because the service isn't great where she lives. Um, but it's sort of like the extended version of what sort of like my mom went through. Um, and now even more so, there's a lot of political strife in the country, and it's just sort of been building up. So challenges of like timing of like when you go, because you want to be conscious of like when is it the safest and things like that. So, and I think just as far as screening, I do know some other Haitian filmmakers that have tried to screen in Haiti, and not tried, but have done some, but it isn't economically viable. And not only that, it's also just where there's in certain, I think in communities here in the States, and where it could be better, there is still an appreciation and support for the arts. It's still a huge privilege. And I think I constantly remind myself of that, because people over there don't, it's harder to have the privilege to go watch a film. As minuscule as it might seem to sort of like us in a first world country, when you're trying to, and not everybody is sort of like at this economic level, but a lot of people are, where you're making ends meet. Like to go and watch a film is like, it have to be something for free, and not only that, it have to be something that doesn't take away from the time that you need in order to make the money that you need to make to provide for your family. So it's a tricky thing, and I think in the want of the artist to want to go screen in your home country, you have to be conscious and aware of the socioeconomic climate, so that you're not sort of like projecting what you want if it doesn't fit naturally with what the country needs, or what the country is probably, or is a priority for the people of the country. So yeah, it's a bittersweet kind of situation.
Yeah, that makes sense. How did you then, what was your first kind of exposure to films growing up, or at what point did you realize you wanted to be in that world at all?
I think I mean, I don't know about most, but I imagine in relation to most, it was a little later, because I went to undergrad for acting, and I went to a conservatory for acting and training. And even in those moments, I wasn't necessarily thinking I want to be a filmmaker. And it wasn't until after undergrad, when we have to do this like one-person show, which is a thesis project where we act and write and sort of produce this one-person show, that I had this thought. I was like, oh, all these characters that I play in my one-person show are my actor friends. So like this could be a short film. It was an idea, as a thought out of nowhere, right? It just came to me. So I literally went to Google and went how to make a film. So 100% student of the DIY world. And from there, and then that film, I had the opportunity to get to some festivals and then license it to HBO as a short film. So it was like, oh, maybe I should keep doing this. But outside, not just because like the HBO thing influenced me to do it, but really in that process, I was really invigorated by the autonomy and the agency to tell your own stories, as opposed to just being a piece of someone else's story as an actor. And I thought that space is something I resonated with, because I wanted to tell very specific stories, and stories that I had seen out there. And the way to do that is to write them yourselves, or produce and create them yourselves. So then that sort of just started the cycle. And it's just been, so ever since that short film to the digital series project to now my first feature, I've just been constantly going and going, to continue to build and create work that represents these underrepresented communities.
That's awesome. And we're very appreciative of you allowing us to show it to our audience here. I think I'm looking at, we're running out of time here. We're going to get cut off, but what happens next with the film, and what happens next with you and your future projects?
Well, I think we're going to a few festivals. I believe, I don't have this on top of my mind. It's tricky because there's some that haven't been announced yet, so I can't necessarily announce them, and I don't know which ones have. But I do know that literally Atlanta is happening right around the corner, if not like now. So Atlanta Film Festival has been exciting, and that's happening virtual. And they're doing some in-persons as well, some drive-ins, I think similar to your format. So, and there's a growing Haitian population there, so I'm excited about that. Then as far as new projects, like I'm working on my second feature right now, writing what looks like it's going to be like closer to the draft, the shooting draft. So I'm excited about that. And it's a big, controversial story, but something that I'm excited to kind of get into. And it follows sort of like the story of it was about a decade ago when a man was like shot dead on the Miami Causeway for biting parts of another man's face.
Uh-huh.
And it was widely associated with bath salts,
Yeah, yeah.
but the assailant's brother has been and still is a very close friend of mine. So we're going in to sort of tell a slice of life, true life drama of the family that sort of had to deal with the infamy of what happened to their brother or son. But it widely touches on issues such as misinformation in the media, dehumanization of Black bodies, different things like this, mental health, because it was widely associated with bath salts, but after multiple autopsies, that was never found in his body. But that's how the media initially put it out there, and that's because people needed to understand how could they needed to sort of put a name to what happened. But yeah, that's something exciting to have a bigger conversation about. But yeah, I've been working on that project.
That sounds intense. I look
Yeah.
forward to checking that out when you finally got it going.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I want to thank you once again for joining us, Edson. Hopefully you get the chance to come up to Winston-Salem in real life and show Ludi again, or your next project, whatever it may be. But we're sorry we missed you in real life. Best of luck with the film getting out there, and thanks once again.
Thank you so much, Chris. I'm really appreciative. And from the whole Ludi team, thank you so much. We're appreciative of RiverRun and the platform. And thanks for everybody that saw it. Please connect with us on social media, at Ludi Film on Instagram and Facebook, and at our production company, Bantufy. That's Bantufy, on social media.
Yep.
Those things.
All
But yeah,
right.
thank you so much, brother.
You take care.